Hello and welcome back to my channel, Skepticus. This is your boy, Adam of NOLA, and this series is called God-Free Bible Study. Today we are starting literally a new book, a new chapter and book, working our way through the final pieces of what is referred to as the Pentateuch. Specifically, we are starting in on Deuteronomy. So I'm pretty excited about this. Just to be getting into the fifth and final book of the Pentateuch. There's still so much more of the Old Testament. Of course, there's still all of the New Testament. Who knows when we're going to finish this journey? But we are reading through virtually all of the Bible right here in front of your face on YouTube. I say virtually because I do skip over pieces of like lineage. I skip over censuses. I skip over the places where there are 2 or 3 or 4 chapters of just all this detailed instruction as to how to build a tabernacle or how to do your sacrifices. But for the most part, we are reading all of the Bible. We started at Genesis 1:1. We went through Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, and now we are into Deuteronomy. So let's get in on this. Before I start, I will mention that a lot of this is, I shouldn't say this before a video, it might make you click off, but a lot of this is repetitive, which I'm really happy to be finishing the Pentateuch, because so much of the Pentateuch feels like, yes, we've heard this already. Yes, you've told us this story. It's always with slightly different verbiage, but so much of it is repetition, and we're going to get more repetition here. Although I will say this right before we dive into Deuteronomy. It is interesting to me how much of Deuteronomy purports to be the direct words of Moses. If you know anything about the Bible, or if you've been following along with God-Free Bible Study, you know already that starting with Exodus, it's really very much the story of Moses. I mean, Moses' character is central to everything that happens from Exodus onward. And yet, Deuteronomy is the first time that it feels like this is Moses speaking to us. Now, there is a Christian mythos around this that says that Moses actually wrote all 5 books of the Pentateuch, which is quite frankly ridiculous. First of all, it's ridiculous because Deuteronomy describes the death of Moses. Now, I know you can make accommodations for that. You can say, well, someone else came in and put in those chapters as far as the death of Moses. But this is the first time in the history of the Bible up to this point when we're getting a lot more direct words from Moses himself. So let's dive into this. Deuteronomy 1, this is called the events at Horeb recalled. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness, on the plain opposite Suph, between Paran and Tephel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Di-Zahab. By the way of Mount Seir. By the way of Mount Seir, it takes 11 days to reach Kadesh Barnea from Horeb. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites just as the Lord had commanded him to speak to them. This was after he had defeated King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth and Edrei. Beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this law as follows. That's a very wordy way of saying that. He undertook to expound this law as follows. Like, okay, I mean, that's coherent. It's just a very wordy way to say that. The Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, "You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Resume your journey and go into the hill country of the Amorites as well as into the neighboring regions, the Arabah, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negeb, and the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and to their descendants after them. One quick note before we continue on this. As an American and as someone who understands U.S. history, this reeks so much to me of manifest destiny. I don't want to go into a long, protracted history lesson. If you're not familiar with U.S. history, there was this concept in the revolutionary period and after the country was established, this idea of manifest destiny. First, it was kind of just this general idea, and then they codified it with a policy by the president. But the idea is just that this is all of our land. We are basically saying that even if we haven't conquered it yet, we feel that we have the right to conquer it. Of course, when America laid out this idea of manifest destiny, the land was not empty. And just as they are talking here about all of these lands that will be the Israelites, these lands are not empty. And yet they're saying, this is all of our land, dudes. Deal with it. So there is a special kind of issue that hits you there if you understand U.S. history. Appointment of tribal leaders. At that time I said to you, I am unable by myself to bear you. The Lord your God has multiplied you, so that today you are as numerous as the stars of heaven. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times more and bless you, as he has promised you. But how can I bear the heavy burden of your disputes all by myself? Choose for each of your tribes individuals who are wise, discerning, and reputable, and I will make them your leaders. You answered me, the plan you have proposed is a good one. So I took the leaders of your tribes, wise and reputable individuals, and installed them as leaders over you, commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, commanders of 50s, commanders of 10s, and officials throughout your tribes. I charged your judges at that time. Give the members of your community a fair hearing and judge rightly between one person and another, whether kin or resident alien. You must not be partial in judging. Hear out the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is God's. Any case that is too hard for you, bring to me, and I will hear it. So I charged you at that time with all the things that you should do. So it's interesting to me that here Moses is basically laying out, speaking this process that he put in place of justice and essentially bureaucratic law according to smaller courts and larger courts. And he's ultimately, I guess you could say, the Supreme Court. It's fine that he's laying this out, but this was made clear to us in Exodus as a process that was suggested to him or given to him, if you will, by his father-in-law, Jethro, who was a Midianite. And I really wonder if this is written here as a purposeful way of whitewashing that fact out of the narrative in Deuteronomy. Because remember, now at this point in the narrative, we've just gotten out of Numbers. And in Numbers, they attacked and wiped out the Midianites, even though Moses is married to a Midianite, and even though his father-in-law was a Midianite, and even though his father-in-law helped him to put in this system of justice, and yet they were happy to wipe out the Midianites. So I wonder, it really feels to me like he's stating these things here in Deuteronomy as a way of kind of retelling the history. Like, no, I came up with this system of justice, even though it's clear in Exodus that this system of justice was directly suggested to him by his father-in-law, Jethro, who, by the way, was a Midianite, who, by the way, is one of the peoples that the Israelites have already attacked and supposedly wiped out. Israel's refusal to enter the land. Then, just as the Lord our God had ordered us, this is still Moses speaking, we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness that you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites until we reached Kadesh Barnea. I said to you, You have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has given the land to you. Go up, take possession as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised you. Do not fear or be dismayed. All of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead of us to explore the land for us and bring back a report to us regarding the route by which we should go up and the cities we will come to. The plan seemed good to me, and I selected 12 of you, one from each tribe. They set out and went up into the hill country, and when they reached the Wadi Escol, they spied it out and gathered some of the land's produce, which they brought down to us. They brought back a report to us and said, it is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us. But you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You grumbled in your tents and said, it is because the Lord hates us that he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to destroy us. Before I continue with this, I want to point out how convenient it is that they are completely ignoring the fact that in previous books, in previous chapters, God had promised to empty the land out. In previous books and chapters, he made it very clear that he was preparing the land, and he said that he was driving these people out, which in fact never happened. There is not a single narrative that I know of here or in future books where they go to take over a new land and they find that, oh, it's been abandoned by the people, which of course makes perfect sense because most people don't just flee their own land and refuse to fight for it. Most people will stand and defend themselves. And yet God promised explicitly that he was emptying out the land. But now he's pissed off that they sent scouts ahead, and the scouts said, oh, it's full of people who will fight us. Where are we headed? Our kindred have made our hearts melt by reporting. The people are stronger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified up to heaven. We actually saw there the offspring of the Anakim. I said to you, have no dread or fear of them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, is the one who will fight for you. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a lie. There is no place here that we've seen up to this point where the Lord is fighting for them. Now, he goes before them in a pillar of fire, and there are some supernatural things associated with Yahweh in this whole narrative, but every time we've seen some narrative that the Egyptians, the one exception that I know to this, up to this point in the narrative, is clearly when the Egyptians were following the Israelites, and the Israelites were walking through the Red Sea, right? And then, Moses parted the Red Sea, the Israelites walked through, the Egyptians followed them, and then when the Egyptians followed them, supposedly the Red Sea came back and wiped them all out. So that, I guess you could argue, is definitely God fighting for them. But every other battle that we've heard of, including the battle that immediately followed there, where Moses had to raise his hands to, keep them winning, and then if he lowered their hands, they were losing. It was really ridiculous. Every other battle has involved Israelites with swords and, weapons fighting other people. This idea that the Lord will fight them and take care of you and take care of this whole problem for you, it keeps getting stated in the narrative, and yet it doesn't happen because it's a lie. It's amazing to me how even in this holy book, this holy text, which you would think the curators would want to put together in such a way as to make their God look as well or as good as possible, it still makes him look over and over again weak, useless, petty, jealous, hateful, etc., etc. And this is just one more example where it says, the Lord your God, this is Moses speaking, but it says, the Lord your God who goes before you is the one who will fight for you. And yet he does not. Just as he did for you in Egypt before your very eyes, and in the wilderness, where you saw how the Lord your God carried you, just as one carries a child. First of all, no, the Lord your God did not carry you. They've been marching around the desert for 40 years. The Lord didn't carry them. And when it says, just as one carries a child, you mean the same way that you put plague on your child when they have the nerve to question you about something? You send poisonous serpents to bite and kill your children when they have the nerve to question you. You open up the earth to swallow them and bring them down to Sheol. That's what you do with your children? Oh my gosh, that's embarrassing. All the way that you traveled until you reached this place. But in spite of this, you have no trust in the Lord your God. Yeah, I wonder why. Who goes before you on the way to seek out a place for you to camp in fire by night and in the cloud by day, to show you the route that you should take. The route? The route we just saw at the end of Numbers, where they spelled out in detail what this route was. And it's ridiculous. We're talking about a route that took them 40 years to cross a wilderness that anyone else, even handicapped, even injured, even, somehow lacking in physical abilities, they could have crossed this wilderness in a matter of weeks. And yet they have been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years. Now, I know that according to the narrative here, it's because God was pissed at them and wanted them to wander around. But don't talk to me about the route God gave you, because anyone with a damn compass or a sense of direction could have made a much easier, clearer route. Yahweh's route sucks ass. The penalty for Israel's rebellion. When the Lord heard your words, he was wrathful and swore, not one of these, not one of this evil generations shall see the good land that I swore to give to your ancestors, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and to his descendants I will give the land on which he set foot, because of his complete fidelity to the Lord. Even with me, the Lord was angry. Again, this is Moses speaking. Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account, saying, you also shall not enter there. Joshua, son of Nun, your assistant, shall enter there. Encourage him, for he is the one who will secure Israel's possession of it. And as for your little ones who you thought would become plunder, your children who today do not yet know right from wrong, they shall enter there. To them I will give it, and they shall take possession of it. But as for you, journey back into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea. You answered me, we have sinned against the Lord. We are ready to go up and fight, just as the Lord our God commanded us. So all of you strapped on your battle gear and thought it easy to go up into the hill country. The Lord said to me, say to them, do not go up and do not fight, for I am not in the midst of you. Otherwise you will be defeated by your enemies. Although I told you, you would not listen. You rebelled against the command of the Lord and presumptuously went up into the hill country. The Amorites who lived in that hill country then came out against you and chased you as bees do. They beat you down in Seir as far as Hormah. When you returned and wept before the Lord would neither heed your voice nor pay you any attention. I want you to think about the narrative that's being given to us here. Basically, according to this narrative, which according to previous texts, this narrative is kind of bullshit. But even if we take this at face value, okay, the people were supposed to go into the Holy Land. They said, let's send some scouts and figure it out. And apparently they weren't as anxious to go as they were previously. And the God, Yahweh, got pissed off at them. So then they tried to make it right by saying, hey, we will go fight now. But now God's saying, no, now it's wrong. Like, dude, you can tell me all day long that they only have to follow him at the time he says to follow them. But this is the whole idea of when he says to follow them is just whenever Moses says so, because the omnipotent God can't be bothered to actually speak directly to his own people. So they have to take everything as the word of Moses, which, oh, by the way, if that sounds like Moses is playing the role of a charlatan who claims to be speaking to God, but is just using it for authority, yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. the desert years, after you had stayed at Kadesh as many days as you did. You know, here's where I think this is funny. I brought this up previously in other books and other chapters. The way that this reads, the sentence starts, after you had stayed at Kadesh as many days as you did, comma, and then Deuteronomy book 2 starts. Book 2 literally starts in the middle of a sentence. And I've said this before, like, for example, after Genesis 1, it doesn't stop in the middle of a sentence, but there's this weird thing where the last paragraph of Genesis 1 really seems to just be the lead in to Genesis 2. And yet, for some reason, they cut off Genesis 1 as being after what feels like the first paragraph of Genesis 2. In this case, in Deuteronomy, they literally start Deuteronomy chapter 2 in the middle of a sentence. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I don't care. Put your sentence markers, or excuse me, your chapter markers wherever you want. But I would love to see like Dan McClellan, or some other biblical scholar who has real knowledge on these things, because I do not, explain, is there a practical reason why they chose to spread like a single sentence between chapter 1 and chapter 2? Because in modern parlance, that's odd. You never stretch a sentence between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. I don't know if this is something that was done for a particular reason to keep you engaged. I'm not sure. But I've only ever seen this in the Bible, where they have these really weird places to cut chapters, and I don't know why it is. But anyway, we're starting chapter 2 of Deuteronomy, but to recap, I'm going to start with the sentence as it begins at the end of chapter 1. After you had stayed at Kadesh as many days as you did, we journeyed back into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea, as the Lord had told me, and skirted Mount Seir for many days. Then the Lord said to me, you have been skirting this hill country long enough. Head north and charge the people as follows. You are about to pass through the territory of your kindred, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. They will be afraid of you, so be very careful not to engage in battle with them, for I will not give you even so much as a foot's length of their land, since I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. You shall purchase food from them for money, so that you may eat, and you shall also buy water from them for money, so that you may drink. Surely the Lord your God has blessed you in all your undertakings. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing, which that's a weird statement. You have lacked nothing. I know he gave them manna from the heavens and all this, but if you read this narrative from Exodus through here, to hear that they've lacked nothing, okay, sure, bro. So we passed by our kin, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, leaving behind the route of the Arabah and leaving behind Elath and Ezion-Geber. When we had headed out along the route of the wilderness of Moab, the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab or engage them in battle, for I will not give you any of its land as a possession, since I have given Ar as a possession to the descendants of Lot. The Emim, a large and numerous people as tall as the Anakim, had formerly inhabited it. Like the Anakim, they are usually reckoned as Rephaim, though the Moabites call them Emim. Moreover, the Horim had formerly inhabited Seir, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them, destroying them and settling in their place, as Israel has done in the land that the Lord gave them as a possession. Now then, proceed to cross over the Wadi Zered. By the way, I've mentioned wadis multiple times every time they come up in the text. I don't know if you guys know this or not. I had to look it up a while back, but a wadi is a dry riverbed which can flow with water during drought or heavy rains, or not during drought, during a flood or heavy rains. But in case you're wondering, like, there's the Wadi Escol, the Wadi Zered, there's all these different wadis. Essentially, they are rivers, but they're not usually flowing with water. So we crossed over the Wadi Zered, and the length of time we had traveled from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Wadi Zered was 38 years. 38 years, until the entire generation of warriors had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn concerning them. Indeed, the Lord's own hand was against them to root them out from the camp until all had perished. I want to bring this up because we've already heard multiple times in the narrative that he basically completely went back on his promises. When he got pissed off with the people, he said, fine, this current generation, you're not going to get to the Holy Land. Only your children will get there. And that's what this is referring to, because he's saying that you have these warriors, but until the entire generation of warriors had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn concerning them, he wasn't going to let them move on, which is really manipulative and self-serving. Because, if you want the warriors gone, if you're like, hey, you guys have screwed up, you've gone against my wishes, I want you dead. In theory, God could kill them right now, instantly. But if he killed all the warriors, who's going to protect the next generation? Who's going to fight whatever battles they have to do while they're in the wilderness? So he lets the warriors hang around for the rest of their lives because they're going to protect his chosen people. Even though the warriors that had at one time been his chosen people, and he went back on his word. But instead of doing the more honorable thing, I think, which would have been just to, off them, if that's what you're really going to do as God. No, he lets them hang around for 38 years so that he can continue to, or they can continue to protect his camp. But then he's not going to let the camp move on until all those old dudes are dead. That's manipulative as hell. Just as soon as all the warriors had died off from among the people, the Lord spoke to me. Again, this is Moses saying, today you are going to cross the boundary of Moab at Ar. When you approach the frontier of the Ammonites, do not harass them or engage them in battle, for I will not give the land of the Ammonites to you as a possession, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot. It also is usually reckoned as a land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly inhabited it, though the Ammonites call them Zamzummim, a strong and numerous people as tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them from before the Ammonites so that they could dispossess them and settle in their place. He did the same for the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir by destroying the Horites before them so that they could dispossess them and settle in their place even to this day. As for the Avim who had lived in settlements in the vicinity of Gaza, the Caphtorim who came from Caphtor destroyed them and settled in their place. I'm going to make a comment here, and I want to make it very clear. I'm not pro-Zion. I'm not anti-Zion. I really feel very neutral in that whole fight. I'm not going to get into it here. There's so much stuff to get into as far as Israel and the Palestinians and all that. But when you read these texts, I can really see how people would cast a wary eye on Jews. And I don't mean that. That's not meant as some anti-Zionist statement. I'm not saying Jews are bad people, okay? I'm not saying that Jews are going to do horrible things to you. I'm not saying that they're controlling all the money in Hollywood or any of that, conspiracy bullshit. But what I am saying is that you read their holy texts, which of course are also the Christian holy texts now. You really read these holy texts, and they're just full of one statement after another about how you are to take over this other land and screw the people that are there. God will help you to dispossess them of the land. If you wonder where this colonist idea comes from, the imperialist ideas of Europe from about 1200 to 1700 AD. I mean, I'm not going to say that the Bible is the only reason for these. Obviously, there are very strong political power manipulation reasons why one large, powerful group like Europe decided to become imperialistic. And it's not just the Bible. I'm not going to lay all the blame there, but they have this justification, which is given to them from the Bible. And again, as an American, as a United States citizen, I read this and I feel like this is just, it feels to me like a charter given to you by your bullshit Yahweh storm god that says, screw whoever's living there. Just go take it over. It's all yours. It feels very personal to me as someone who's in the United States who knows the history of this country, where we basically came in, looked at the native peoples and said, screw you, we're taking it all. And gosh, it's all codified right here in your Bible. Proceed on your journey and cross the Wadi Arnon. See, I have handed over to you King Sihon, the Amorite of Heshbon, and his land. Begin to take possession by engaging him in battle. This day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under heaven. The dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under heaven. Again, this feels like a God telling you to wipe people out and screw those who are already on the land. When they hear report of you, they will tremble and be in anguish because of you. This just feels like divine sanction for any imperialistic bullshit that you want to do. The defeat of King Sihon. So I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemoth to King Sihon of Heshbon with the following terms of peace. If you let me pass through your land, I will travel only along the road. I will turn aside neither to the right nor to the left. You shall sell me food for money so that I may eat, and supply me water for money so that I may drink. Only allow me to pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau who live in Seir have done for me, and likewise the Moabites who live in Ar, until I cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord our God is giving us. The king Sihon of Heshbon was not willing to let us pass through, for the Lord your God had hardened his spirit and made his heart defiant in order to hand him over to you, as he has now done. This is very interesting to me because I had forgotten, every time we talk about God hardening someone's heart, what's the first thing that you think about if you know the Bible? You're thinking about Pharaoh. You're thinking about Exodus. And that alone is a disgusting period where God is braying like a jackass and telling everyone, hey, not only are we going to do these things, but I am going to harden the Pharaoh's heart. I'm going to make him resistant to you just so that I can do more bad things to him and all the people of Egypt solely for the purpose of proving that I'm a badass. Even if it kills scores of Egyptians, I don't care. But from this passage here, you can see that this isn't the only time that God absolutely messes with free will. Now, in this case, to be fair, this is not God talking. This is Moses talking. But if you can't trust Moses to tell the story properly, who can you trust in the Bible? I mean, according to Judeo-Christian theology, he's on the Rushmore of biblical figures. So even though this is Moses talking, it's Moses saying, the Lord your God had hardened his spirit and made his heart defiant in order to hand him over to you, as he has now done. In other words, Moses is telling you that God hardened the heart of King Sihon of Heshbon solely for the purpose then of beating him and his people down. Tell me about your free will, Christians. The Lord said to me, see, I have begun to give Sihon and his land over to you. Begin now to take possession of his land. So when Sihon came out against us, he and all his people for battle at Jahaz, the Lord our God gave him over to us, and we struck him down along with his offspring and all his people. At that time, we captured all his towns, and in each town we utterly destroyed men, women, and children. We left not a single survivor. Notice the distinct note of sorrow and regret that's in the words of Moses here. Oh, wait, that's right. There is no sorrow. There is no regret. Moses is more than happy just to write down that we destroyed men, women, and children. We left not a single survivor. And why did they all have to die? Because God hardened King Sihon's heart. Okay. Only the livestock we kept as spoil for ourselves, as well as the plunder of the towns that we had captured. From Aurora, on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, including the town that is in the Wadi itself, as far as Gilead, there was no citadel too high for us. The Lord our God gave everything to us. You did not encroach, however, on the land of the Ammonites, avoiding the whole upper region of the Wadi Jabbok, as well as the towns of the hill country, just as the Lord our God had charged. How would you like to be one of my advisors? I'm using Skepticus's memberships as a way to allow you to have a voice in the content and the direction of this channel. I hope to see you in the membership pool, and I want to hear your voice in what Skepticus is doing going forward. So now this is Deuteronomy 3, the defeat of King Og. When we headed up the road to Bashan, King Og of Bashan came out against us, he and all his people, for battle at Edrei. The Lord said to me, "Do not fear him, for I have handed him over to you, along with his people and his land. Do to him as you did to King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon." So the Lord our God also handed over to us King Og of Bashan and all his people. We struck him down until not a single survivor was left. Once again, yay genocide. Kill everyone. At that time, we captured all his towns. There was no citadel that we did not take from them. 60 towns, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All these were fortress towns with high walls, double gates, and bars, besides a great many villages, and we utterly destroyed them, as we had done to King Sihon of Heshbon, in each city utterly destroying men, women, and children. Because you know who you gotta kill every time you go through some new city that you want to conquer? You gotta kill all the children, all the women, kill everyone. Death, death, death. That is what Yahweh wants. But all the livestock and the plunder of the towns we kept as spoil for ourselves. If you think that I'm being unfair in this, I understand that on one level you can read this just as a conquering chronicle from one people who established their foothold in a region. And if you just read it as that, that's fine. If you don't take into account all this God speak, because when you put the God speak in it, it moves from being an ancient war chronicle to being a disgusting statement on the bankrupt moral standards of your God. Because we've already proven here that God doesn't care about free will. God will harden people's hearts. So if he can change the way that you think, he could have told all of these people, get up and move. He could have put in their minds and their hearts, we have to migrate somewhere else. He could have forced all of them to abandon all of these lands. But he wasn't interested in that because that does not bring him glory. That does not allow him to jerk himself off while he watches his little desert tribe conquer everyone else. So at that time, we took from the two kings of the Amorites the land beyond the Jordan, from the Wadi Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, while the Amorites call it Senir. All the towns of the tableland, the whole of Gilead, and all of Bashan, as far as Salakah and Edrei, towns of Og's kingdom in Bashan. Now only King Og of Bashan was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. In fact, his bed, an iron bed, can still be seen in Rabbah of the Ammonites. By the common cubit, it is 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. I just want to point out here really quickly. Remember I said that there's this ridiculous tradition in many Christian denominations that says that all of this was written by Moses. Aside from the obviously ridiculous things like, well, Moses didn't write about his own death, you also have statements like this, where it's clearly the writer is writing from a time somewhat well past what they're writing about, because it says, in fact, his bed, an iron bed, can still be seen in Rabbah of the Ammonites. That's not something that you write if you were writing it as a real-time chronicle or something that you write shortly after the fact. If I was in a group of people and we conquered Atlanta last week, I'm not going to write in the narrative. In fact, you can still see the stadium for the Braves there, because that would sound stupid if I'm writing it a week later. This is the kind of narrative, the kind of description that you put in when you are writing at least decades and maybe even centuries after the fact. You put in this parenthetical that says, oh, he had this iron bed and it can still be seen to this day. That is a narrative point that's put in by someone who is writing well after the events. But it can't be Moses writing well after the events, because Moses dies during the events. So before we finish Deuteronomy, Moses will be dead. So clearly, this was not written by Moses. Even if we assume that Moses is a historical figure, he walked the earth, fine. Even if we give you that, this was not written by Moses. Get real. As for the land that we took possession of at that time, I gave to the Reubenites and Gadites the territory north of Aroer, that is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, as well as half the hill country of Gilead with its towns. And I gave to the half tribe of Manasseh the rest of Gilead and all of Bashan, Og's kingdom. The whole region of Argob, all that portion of Bashan used to be called a land of Rephaim. Jair the Manassite acquired the whole region of Argob as far as the border of the Geshurites and the Maccathites, and he named them, that is Bashan, after himself, Havoth Jair, as it is to this day. Once again, one of those anachronistic narrative points where it says, as it is to this day. Well, if you're writing this as a real-time chronicle or something that you wrote right after the events, you don't write in there as it is to this day. That's the kind of thing that you put in when you're writing something decades or centuries after the events. But Moses was not alive decades or centuries after these events, because Moses dies in Deuteronomy. To Machir I gave Gilead, and to the Reubenites and the Gadites I gave the territory from Gilead as far as the Wadi Arnon, with the middle of the wadi as a boundary, and up to the Jabbok, the wadi being boundary of the Ammonites. The Arabah also, with the Jordan and its banks, from Chinnereth down to the Sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea, with the lower slopes of Pisgah on the east. It is interesting to me here, because we're still hearing, this is still quoting supposedly from Moses. And it says here, and to the Reubenites and the Gadites, I gave the territory from Gilead as far as the Wadi Arnon, and then it goes on to spell out the rest of the territories. So it does feel to me like in Deuteronomy, we're getting a little bit of this breakdown of this idea that everything comes from God. I've said since Exodus that this feels very much to me like the God behind the curtain isn't there. And this is very much Moses, even if we assume, let's say Moses was a historical character. I mean, all the details of this narrative absolutely did not happen, but let's just assume that there was somebody who filled this Moses role, whether he had the name of Moses or whatever. A lot of this reads as someone who is invoking the name of a unseen deity as a way of bolstering his power and his authority. And I feel like a lot of this comes out in Deuteronomy when he says things like, and to the Reubenites and the Gadites, I gave the territory from Gilead as far as the Wadi Arnon. In previous books, you would have assumed that this is all given by God, by Yahweh. But here it's getting a little more personal with regard to what Moses himself is supposedly saying. At that time, I charged you as follows. Although the Lord your God has given you this land to occupy, all your troops shall cross over armed as the vanguard of your Israelite kin. Only your wives, your children, and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, shall stay behind in the towns that I have given to you, when the Lord gives rest to your kindred as to you, and they also have occupied the land that the Lord your God has given them beyond the Jordan, then each of you may return to the property that I have given to you. And I charged Joshua as well at that time, saying, your own eyes have seen everything that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So the Lord will do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who fights for you. Moses views Canaan from Pisgah. At that time, too, I entreated the Lord, saying, O Lord God, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your might. What God in heaven or on earth can perform deeds and mighty acts like yours? Let me cross over to see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. But the Lord was angry with me on your account and would not heed me. The Lord said to me, enough from you. Never speak to me of this matter again. This is interesting to me because this is, as far as I know, the only account that indicates that Moses is basically asking to be at least allowed temporarily into the Holy Land. Because remember, Moses and Aaron and the rest of them, they aren't allowed to go because they rebelled against God, which complete fucking crap. But anyway, it's interesting to see that this narrative says that basically Moses wanted to at least go over, and God's like, stop this, enough from you. Never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the top of Pisgah and look around you to the west, to the north, to the south, and to the east. Or you could just say, look all around you. Look well, for you shall not cross over this Jordan, but charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, because it is he who shall cross over at the heed of his people, and who shall secure their possession of the land that you will see. So we remained in the valley opposite Beth Peor. All right, so we are going to get through Deuteronomy 4 in this reading, in this episode. This is Moses commands obedience. Yeah, everyone always commands obedience. So now, Israel, give heed to the statutes and ordinances that I am teaching you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. You must neither add anything to what I command you, nor take anything from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God with which I am charging you. This is a very interesting commandment here from Moses, and I don't hear this brought up a lot. When we talk about old law and new law, when we talk about what's the ceremonial law or the moral law, all these other bullshit distinctions that Christians try to put upon this. But just as Jesus in the New Testament said that not a single jot nor tittle of the old law is going away, that it won't go away until the earth goes away and the heavens, I feel like this is kind of similar, because this is Moses saying, you must neither add anything to what I command you, nor take away anything from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God with which I am charging you. In other words, Moses is saying, this is the law. You don't add to it. You don't take away from it. You don't edit it. He's writing a line in the sand. He's saying, look, it's done. These are the laws. It's kind of a dick move, really, because he's basically saying, look, no, don't ever evolve any of these laws going forward, which I guess you could argue if they're from God, maybe that's the right idea. But in practical sense, that's almost always a bad paradigm for governance, to have laws that are immutable. Nevertheless, Moses here is saying that you can't add anything to the law. You can't take anything away from it. You can't change it. This is the law, the commandments of the Lord your God, which I am charging you. That's pretty explicit. It's just another example of where modern day Christians want to pick and choose what they grab out of this old ass book. And the text itself does not support that at all. Neither the Old Testament nor the New makes it clear that, we can pick and choose what we want. Now, I know in the New, it gets dicier because, like in Acts, they go through this whole prolonged process of essentially overriding the law and overriding even what Jesus said, which is mind-blowing to me. But just as Jesus said that not a tittle nor jot of the law shall go away, Moses is saying that these are the commandments. Full stop. And that's really interesting to me. You have seen for yourselves what the Lord did with regard to the Baal of Peor, how the Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed the Baal of Peor, while those of you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. He says that those who held fast are all alive today, which that's wow, that's pretty selective to say that, because they may be alive today, but God made it clear that even if you're alive today, you're going to die before you get to the Holy Land, because he's pissed off that you were thirsty and you asked for water. And he's pissed off that you were hungry and you asked for food. And he's pissed off that you were scared of the enemy and you actually asked for better plans. Despite all that, yes, there are probably some people who came from Egypt who are still alive at this writing. And Moses has the nerve here to say, well, those of you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. Yeah, but they've been abandoned by the bullshit non-promise of God. Wow. See, just as the Lord my God has charged me, I now teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. You must observe them and perform them, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what other great nation has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances as just as this entire law that I am setting before you today? Well, I don't know. I mean, the Code of Hammurabi was pretty damn just, and in many ways was more just than this crap. I find it hard to believe that there are no other nations that have anything as just as these commandments, but fine. I guess we're going to say, what other country has statutes and ordinances that are as just as this? Sure, but take care and watch yourselves closely, so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor to let them slip from your mind all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how you once stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord said to me, assemble the people for me, and I will let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me as long as they live on the earth, and may teach their children so. You approached and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain was blazing up to the very heavens, shrouded in dark clouds. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. Yeah, doesn't that sound like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain? He declared to you his covenant, which he charged you to observe, that is, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 stone tablets. And the Lord charged me at that time to teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy. Since you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, watch yourselves closely, so that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. These commandments feel very Muslimish. And I don't really care, that Christians don't follow these commandments, but I always find it interesting when you read some of this stuff, because this is where a lot of the Muslim ideas come from. Like, you can't have representations of animals or people or anything on the earth, for that matter. If you go into a Muslim temple, a mosque, all of the artwork will be either words and letters, usually done in very fancy kind of form, or geographic shapes, but they won't have images. Well, they certainly don't have images of Muhammad, but they don't even have images of anyone else. They don't have images of people. They don't have images of animals. They don't have images of landscapes. Nothing. And it feels to me very much like this is where this comes from. And when you look up to the heavens and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, do not be led astray and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples everywhere under heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron smelter, out of Egypt, to become a people of his very own possession, as you are now. Yes, God believes that the Hebrews are his possession, like slaves. The Lord was angry with me because of you, and he vowed that I should not cross the Jordan and that I should not enter the good land that the Lord your God is giving for your possession. For I am going to die in this land without crossing over the Jordan, but you are going to cross over to take possession of that good land. So be careful, lest you forget the covenant that the Lord your God made with you and make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything that the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. I know that this came down to us directly from God's words in Exodus, but once again, this idea of God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. And yet, what do Christians want to tell you over and over and over again? God is love. God is perfectly just. God is perfectly loving. He's omnibenevolent. Oh, really? Because here it says directly that he's a devouring fire and a jealous God. And oh, by the way, if you've watched any of the other episodes, there's more than enough text and more than enough purported actions to back this up, that Yahweh is a devouring fire and a jealous God. I want to mention this. I think I mentioned this before in a previous episode. So if I'm repeating myself, forgive me, but I just want to mention this really quickly. It baffles me that the Judeo-Christian idea of God embraces the idea of jealousy. Now, on one hand, I would tell you that no emotion is good or bad. They're just emotions. Even hate. We think hate's bad, right? Hate can serve a purpose. Okay, sometimes you need to hate someone, like someone who's attacking you or outwardly threatening you. But generally speaking, we tend to think of some emotions as being good and some emotions as being not so good. And jealousy is not a cool emotion. It's not something to brag about in yourself. This is way too much information, okay? I've never talked about this before on the channel, but I'm polyamorous. Not that anyone needs to know or cares. But one of the key aspects of being polyamorous is that you have to learn to deal with jealousy. Because if your partner is with someone else, of course, jealousy can make that very difficult. And I'm not promoting polyamory for anyone. I mean, you can be monogamous all your life. That's great. I'm happy for you. I only bring it up because when I tell people sometimes that I'm polyamorous, one of the common responses that I get is, oh, well, I could never do that because I'm just a really jealous person, which is fine. It's fine to acknowledge that in yourself, but then they'll just say that as though, well, I'm just really jealous. End of story. And I always think to myself, well, maybe you should get some therapy for that. Like maybe you should try to fix that in you. And I'm not saying fix it so that you can become polyamorous. Even if you're monogamous your entire life, jealousy is not something that you want to foster in yourself. You should not hold on to that and say, well, I'm just a really jealous dude. It's like saying I'm a really petty person, or I'm a really angry person, or, all these different kind of emotions, which in the right context can be okay. But in general, I'd say if you have these issues, if you're generally an angry person or a petty person or a jealous person, maybe you should go see someone about that. Maybe you should go see a therapist, because they're not long-term personality attributes that you should cling to, nor should you be proud of them. And yet, supposedly, our God, Yahweh, loves the fact that he's jealous. When you have had children and children's children and become complacent in the land, if you act corruptly by making an idol in the form of anything, thus doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will not live long on it, but will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples. Only a few of you will be left among the nations where the Lord will lead you. There you will serve gods made by human hands, objects of wood and stone that neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. I love how it says this. I understand what they're referring to. They're referring to this idea of fake gods and fake idols that just represent, they're just wood or statues or whatever. But it says, you will serve gods made by human hands, objects of wood and stone that neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. I think most people assume that God can see. Most people assume that God can hear. Most people assume that God can smell. do most people assume that Yahweh eats? I did a whole video on this months ago about, the idea that we're made in God's image and, does God really look like us? Does he have the same features that we do? Because if you follow it logically, it's ridiculous. It makes no sense because does God have a digestive tract? Does he poop? Does he eat things? Because if he doesn't eat, these features have no purpose whatsoever. It makes no sense to have a digestive tract if you never consume food. But if you do consume food, if God eats, that implies that he has a caloric intake, that he needs on some level to consume energy and nutrients, which would seem to go against everything that the modern Judeo-Christian idea entails about God. So it's funny that it says, you'll end up, serving gods that don't eat. Well, does Yahweh eat? I know that in the text here, it says all the time that he enjoys the pleasing aroma of the sacrifices, which in and of itself I find to be ridiculous. But it never says that he eats the sacrifices, Okay, dude. From there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and soul. In your distress, when all these things have happened to you in time to come, you will return to the Lord your God and heed him, because the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will neither abandon you nor destroy you. He will not forget the covenant with your ancestors that he swore to them, unless, of course, he decides at any point in time that he doesn't like your attitude, and then he will completely go back on any promises he's given to you and or your ancestors, and he will just punish you and call you a little bitch because he doesn't care. So yeah, that's the mercy of your God. The mercy of the God. So this is a merciful God, the one who sent snakes on his own people, poisonous snakes on his own people in the wilderness. The one who opened up the earth to swallow up those who had the audacity to question Moses. This is your merciful God. For ask now about former ages, long before your own, ever since the day that God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of heaven to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened, or has its like ever been heard of? I really feel like this statement from Moses is really like an explicit acknowledgement of the fact that this is a long oral tradition. Yes, we might be reading the written artifacts of it, but this all comes from a long oral tradition, which is why he's saying here to ask now about former ages, long before your own, ever since the day that God created human beings. Basically, he's saying these are long passed down stories. Has any people ever heard the voice of a God speaking out of a fire as you have heard and lived? That's yes. I mean, that's hilarious to me, because if you go back through the traditions, the Greek traditions and the Nordic traditions and Hindu traditions and all these other religions, Zoroastrianism, I mean, how many of them have examples in their legends and their traditions of people who have heard God speaking, whether it's out of fire or anything else, and lived? I mean, this statement, has any people ever heard the voice of a God speaking out of a fire as you have heard and lived? Well, according to the traditions of many other people, yeah, they have. So that's a silly statement, or silly question on his part. Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by terrifying displays of power, as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? Again, I can't give you an exact example from mythology or from ancient religions, but I'm almost certain the answer is yes. Yes, it has. I mean, I know you could sit there and say, well, those other religions didn't exist. Their gods aren't real, but that's just your ethnocentric bias. But if we take the stories from each of these religions, this is not unique to Judeo-Christianity. To you, it was shown so that you would acknowledge that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. From heaven, he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth, he showed you his great fire while you heard his words coming out of the fire. And because he loved your ancestors, he chose their descendants after them. He brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than yourselves, to bring you in, giving you their land for a possession as it is still today. And one more time, when it says as it is still today, that is a small but significant sign that this is not Moses writing. Because if this was Moses writing, he wouldn't be looking at this in the past and saying, oh, has this not happened? No, he would be writing this at or close to the time that it happened. So acknowledge today and take to heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is no other. Keep his statutes and his commandments, which I am commanding you today for your own well-being and that of your descendants after you, so that you may long remain in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all time. Cities of refuge east of the Jordan. Then Moses set apart on the east side of the Jordan 3 cities to which a homicide could flee, someone who unintentionally kills another person. The two not having been at enmity before, the homicide could flee to one of these cities and live. Bezer in the wilderness on the tableland belonging to the Reubenites, Ramoth in Gilead belonging to the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan belonging to the Manassites. Again, there's so much here that's just repetition. If you were watching previous episodes from Numbers, you know that we talked about cities of refuge in some detail. But here we are again talking about cities of refuge. Transition to the second address. This is the law that Moses set before the Israelites. These are the decrees and the statutes and ordinances that Moses spoke to the Israelites when they had come out of Egypt, beyond the Jordan in the valley opposite Beth Peor, in the land of King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned at Heshbon, whom Moses and the Israelites defeated when they came out of Egypt. They occupied his land in the land of King Og of Bashan, the 2 kings of the Amorites on the eastern side of the Jordan, from Aroer, which is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon as far as Mount Sirion, that is Hermon, together with all the Arabah on the east side of the Jordan as far as the sea of the Arabah under the slopes of Pisgah. So that there brings us through Deuteronomy 4. So we've read the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy. I know, as I said already, some of it's a bit repetitive, although there are still interesting tweaks and variations on the text that we don't get from previous versions in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. So we're going to continue to drive through Deuteronomy, but that's the last chapter we'll be going through today. Thank you so much for joining me here on my channel, Skepticus. This is my series, God-Free Bible Study. Of course, this is your boy, Adam of NOLA. If I have in any way screwed up this text, if God himself, if Jebus, if the Holy Spirit, if Satan would like to correct me on any level, I am always all ears and waiting to hear from them. Anything? Guys? I guess I nailed it. Thank you so much to our members. You guys are giving me lifeblood. I appreciate all of your patronage. Thank you to everyone who's watched this video. Please like and subscribe, to do all the things, interact, tell everyone they're awesome, argue in the comments. I don't know. I hope to see you all on future videos, but until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.